my fellow citizens of all nations. In this video, we are going to react to the rise of the post-church society. The video is by Deutsche Wahlen. So let's watch this video. Of course, reading is a big part of my life. Most of the videos on this channel are actually book summaries that I have read. And basically, let's see what this video is all about.
This year, then you're already part of the exception. Recent studies show a staggering decline in reading books. In contrast, there's a sharp increase in other media consumption, particularly short-form videos.
We're actually now sort of finding it much harder to focus on a book, even if we wanted to. So I really think it's a change in technology.
Rose Horowitz recently wrote a viral article titled "The End of Reading is Here," and she explored a phenomenon you're probably familiar with: ever shorter attention spans, difficulties concentrating for longer periods, and struggles dealing with complex ideas.
Yes, so this is a trend that's been going on for a long time, and it sort of started with the television, which crowded out time that people used to spend reading. I think by 1985, the average American household spent 7 hours a day in front of the TV. So it just substitutes in a lot of time. Then, with streaming and internet and smartphones, it becomes, even harder to find time to sit down with a book.
So this comparison kind of appears one-sided because first of all, before we start saying that the appearance of television, etc., has lowered the time people spend reading, like what's the literacy rate of the societies? I mean, which countries are we talking about? As well, I also would agree that the short videos definitely basically had a huge influence on our minds, because I would also say that, yeah, I am reading far less myself as well. Probably the attention span is definitely getting shorter for people. But at the same time, we should not, I think we should not create this image that, oh, there was a time where people were reading a lot.
And, I argue that over time, these social media platforms, which might have initially, been kind of text dominant, are now switching to short form videos. And that's kind of getting us so accustomed to switching between, different frames, switching between something if it doesn't immediately grab our attention, that we're actually now sort of finding it much harder to focus on a book, even if we wanted to. So I really think it's a change in technology.
True.
And rather than just being a cultural blip, this
definitely, it's just true. I remember the era basically of the internet where the short videos were not this popular. Right now it's everywhere, in every platform. The short videos are the thing, and they give us instant gratification. If they don't, we could just scroll until it gives us gratification. And yeah, it's really addictive,
This might signal a watershed moment in human civilization.
Yes, so in my article, I argue that we're entering a post-literate society. And, we know from the statistics that, people are reading much less than they used to. The share of Americans who read a book or an article on any given day has declined by 40% over the past 2 decades. And, I think what's significant about that is not just, the decline and people reading a few different books, but really that we are having a wholesale movement away from text. And I argue in the piece that, the communications media that we use kind of shape the way we interact with one another. They shape the way we think and take in information. They shape the way our politics and culture work. And so I argue that, this isn't just, the, share of people who read is going down some. It is a wholesale shift.
Now, she argues the current shift is pretty significant and not in a good way. So could this be a slide into idiocracy or even into a new dark age?
Yes, so I talked about the Library of Alexandria at the beginning and the end of my piece, and I wanted to use that because the sort of story for years among historians was that this library was destroyed by an act of war, and this amazing place of knowledge, Caesar burned it when he came to Alexandria, and that started the Dark Ages. But actually, the more recent kind of consensus among historians is that there was no external act that destroyed the library. The library was destroyed because nobody cared enough to maintain it. It was neglected. And so it wasn't that the library was destroyed and then we had the Dark Ages. We knew the Dark Ages were here because nobody cared enough to maintain the library. And I was sort of trying to argue that something similar is happening now.
Look, I am quite sure that we are talking about the invasion that burned the library of Alexandria. It was related to invasion. It was related to sabotage or something like that. I don't believe that just burned because of neglect. In ancient times, controlling or fire was incredibly difficult. Even to this day, people find it incredibly difficult to manage fires. I find this argument sort of no.
Now, because we can still read. We might be reading more words each day with emails and text messages and social media posts, but we're not taking the time to really, engage with rich and complex texts. And so that's what I meant by the darkness gathering again.
Right, so that's the cultural diagnosis. Here's the biological one.
We don't spend so much time, I think, on social media because we like it or find it rewarding. We spend that time because we have been hacked.
Anders Hansen is a Swedish psychiatrist and best-selling author who spent years researching what screens do to the brain. And to understand the hack, he says, start with a fact most of us never consider, that reading is unnatural.
The brain never evolved for reading. We've had written language for just 5,000 years, and that is a very short time for evolution. So we don't have a reading center dedicated in the brain. Learning to read is nothing that is genetically pre-programmed. It's something that we have to practice, and that probably makes it more reversible. It's vulnerable to decline if we don't use it as much.
Look, I have to activate my own Schopenhauer here. And I will explain basically why I'm activating my own Schopenhauer in this conversation. We were talking about the books, reading books and etc. But we are not talking about something far worse than reading books. And you know what is it? This pseudo-literature that has become so popular in recent years, especially in U.S. culture. And through U.S. culture, it just spreads everywhere. This is called this addiction to have a bestseller. As if the book has a badge of a bestseller, it changes something. It gives it more. It gives it more value. It is marketed as, oh, it's a bestseller. It's a badge of honor, but bestseller is just a bestseller. It is what it says it is. It does not say most valuable book of the month or a year, or most interesting, most enriching, most controversial, or read this book and you will learn much more from this. No, it just says it's a bestseller this year, this month, or whatever. But it does not change anything. And for example, recently I have read 1984, right? Most people, for example, buy that book, right? But how many actually read it? And out of that, how many actually just pretend that they have read it because it's a bestseller? So what is happening is that it's pushing other people to buy it because, oh, it's a bestseller, so let me pick it. So more and more people buy it, and it creates sort of false impression. But I won't bother talking about a bunch of BS books that have no value at all. They are written just for an author to make money. That was the main purpose of that book. And most of that type of books end up becoming bestsellers. And there is this notion that exists within society about the books. It says something similar of, oh, if it is the newest edition of a book, or by the new researcher or whatever, or new philosopher, it is the best book and it should be most advanced version. But it's not true. For example, let's take a Stoic literature. Most of the books I read about Stoicism, on my YouTube channel as well, you can find plenty of books about Stoicism. I can tell you that I read this Stoic book by modern author, and literally the guy was only sharing the summary of ancient Stoics works. This is all he was doing. So you might as well just open the Stoic book yourself and read it yourself instead of just reading a summary of someone else's idea. Same thing could be said about the movie industry, right? Why are most movies so stupid? Unless you would want to disagree with that most movies they make today is quite stupid. Because the goal is not to sort of make people more smarter or make them think about something deeper. No, idea is to make much more money, to make it appeal for younger generation, so they can drag their parents and etc. to watch that as well, and etc. That's the main goal. So same thing is probably happening in movie industry as well, and same thing is going on in terms of in books as well. The entertainment. This is the path of basically least resistance, right? You pick up the phone, you scroll it, and I'm guilty of that. I'm not saying I'm not guilty of it. I stand above it. I also scroll these videos as well, and they are short videos. They poison brain. They definitely shorten our attention span.
Vulnerable to decline. That means a skill humanity spent 5,000 years building can be unlearned if it's not actively trained. So what happens to a society that loses this capacity?
We've had a huge increase in IQ during the last 100 years. If you do an IQ test today, and you will get 100 points, which is the average, you would have had 130 points 100 years ago. So that would have made, if your average IQ today, you would be among the 3 to 4% of the population that is smartest. If you had 100 points average 100 years ago and you do the same test today, you will have an IQ of 70, which is the border of mental retardation. This doesn't mean that our ancestors a couple of generations ago were stupid. It means that we practice these things a lot more. And we have become smarter because we have practiced the things that are measured in IQ test. We read more, we have longer education, and so on and so forth. And this really shows that the brain is plastic. It will adapt to whatever surroundings it finds itself in. So if we stop reading, will this turn down again? We will go back in IQ, and that's perfectly possible. So the fact that we are not reading anymore, we don't know what the consequences are.
A big experiment, 8 billion subjects, no control group, and what it costs us might only be obvious once it's gone.
Who could memorize the Iliad or the Odyssey today? Like, we don't practice it, so we're not ready to do so. And yet we would say that that's, been a worthwhile trade-off.
Look, the memorizing Iliad and Odyssey, it used to be part of a certain culture, for example, in my culture, it used to be a big thing to remember the knight in the panther skin. And for example, and in Arabic or in Muslim culture, for example, it's to this day part of tradition to remember entire Quran. And there are still quite a lot of people that do that. In Christianity as well, there are certain traditions to remember Psalms or certain part of Bible or some entire Bible, and I'm sure there are still monks who know Bible very well, and etc. So it really, memorization of certain things, it's a part of a culture, nothing to do with society. It's all about values.
So I do think that, as we transition to a different technology, it actually isn't crazy to think that writing and reading would go away. This has happened before, and, it just involves very big trade-offs.
So the idea of reading a book could actually become a thing of the past.
Yes, I think that it will just go to be a very small group who read and write. I spoke with a historian who already compared it to like a niche hobby, like orchid, like gardening orchids or stamp collecting. And so I think we'll just see that pool of readers getting smaller and smaller.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I think to this day already saying that you are a book reader is a niche. I mean, most people don't read. Maybe this generation is right now, maybe 2-3 years from now, maybe, history sometimes works in cycles, right? So there is a chance that reading books might still become and return to the top once again.
Screens aren't new. Television owned our evenings for decades. But what's happening now is different.
So we seem to get more and more easily distracted by our screens. And there was a study done in Sweden at the Karolinska that actually showed this black and white, where they had students followed, almost 8,000, I think, and they were followed between 10 to 14 between those years in their lives. And it turns out that the ones who spent a lot of time on social media, their ability to focus was reduced during this period. Computer games or TV did not have that effect. It was just social media.
Oh, the games and TV don't affect the attention span, but the social media does. There is something about social media that is incredibly disappointing, right? Even take any social media. I mean, people just try to show their best in social media every time. They want to appear this grander than life, and they create this fake narrative. So they become victims of their own imaginary self at a certain point.
So maybe that should.
And there's one more important thing I missed to say. I think it's impossible to talk about all this without touching the economical part of the aspect of the world. And in type of economy we all live.
Shows that we are getting used to so much fast chopped up information that is easily digestible that we don't practice our ability to focus on one and the same thing to get immersed into a book. And what we've also seen in the whole of Europe during the last 25 years is that reading comprehension has dropped.
There is this Georgian joke that I love to say often because it brings a point. So there's this famous Georgian guy, his name was Otia. Basically someone goes up to him and they tell him that, oh, we always read books. We try to read at least 20 pages before we go to sleep. And this guy, basically, this old man, turns out and asks, how can you sleep if you're reading 20 pages, right? And if you think about it, it's true. If you're reading 20 pages, either you are very tired, and most people are actually very tired because of the economy, because of the economical system we are living under. It's based on consumerism. It's based on a lot of depression, actually, inner anxiety that is hidden, not understanding why we are doing certain things, going with the flow, and etc. So it's based on that. So the unconscious mind actually still is aware of it, but the conscious side is trying to avoid it, but unconscious is still aware of it. So that creates basically rift. If you think about it, some books are so interesting that you might forget about the time.
It started 25 years ago, so it's been going on for a long time, but the decline has been especially fast during the last 7 years. So maybe social media has turbocharged an already existing development.
And he says that pull works because of what we are.
We never evolved to be happy or smart or creative. We humans evolved to survive.
Yes.
And
definitely survive and to survive. That's all. That's the goal, basically. That has been a goal for us, and I think that primitive brain still is very powerful.
The world where we evolved was incredibly dangerous. Half of all humans died before they became teenagers.
I wish I could agree on this, because he said that the world we grew up in was incredibly dangerous. I think world is still dangerous. We are literally talking about how society is becoming dumber at the end of the day, right? This is what this person has said. This is what we are leading this discussion to. But at the same time, we have people that are driving these machines, which is cars, which I've talked about. People are driving cars. The same people that are getting and it turns out we are getting dumber as a society. Yet we are allowed to drive these incredibly powerful vehicles. And just generally, every car for image, for pedestrian, every car is a tank, right? And if you think about it, a lot of accidents happen, actually. And the reason why I'm aware of why I'm talking about this is that unfortunate thing has happened a few days ago in Georgia, in my country, basically, where a mother and a daughter, a young daughter, basically, were crossing the street and the car hit them. So many horrible things are happening with these cars, and people are just allowed to drive cars, and not only cars, but they are allowed to drive bigger things, and that takes a lot of responsibility, and it is really dangerous.
And they did not die from cardiovascular disease or cancer or stroke, but they died from dehydration, starvation, accidents, bleeding, murder, and so on. So that means that we humans evolved in a very, very dangerous world. And to constantly scan your surroundings, is there something there, all the time, that made a lot of sense. So focus, which we value so much.
Yeah, we don't, I don't think we scan that type of thing all the time, but I think society as a whole, in general, because of all the new wars that are breaking out and etc., we are starting to become aware of it, that, oh, the peace is not guaranteed and bad thing might happen.
Much in our society is actually something that is very fragile for the brain, and it should be fragile. We should be easily distracted because that helped us to survive. We spend that time because we have been hacked. These companies have hacked our psychological Achilles heels. And why have they done that? Well, because the most valuable thing in human society is not gold or dollar or euros or what have you. It's human attention.
And your attention is harvested by something television never.
But human attention leads to profits, right? Me and my friend actually were talking about it, that, I was texting him basically that, oh, bruh, I want to buy for myself maybe new headphones, etc. What do you think I should buy? And suddenly I go to another social media site and I see ads about headphones and etc. So it happens quite often, right? This is monitored for the sake of profit. For the sake of profit.
Had a machine that knows you personally.
I think the big difference now is that social media companies have used algorithms that detects things that we can't look away from, and that is tailored to each and every one of us individually. So every time I log into Instagram or Facebook or what have you, there's an AI directing its attention to me and saying, what stuff should I show him so that he does not log out?
And the big tech companies aren't the only ones bidding for that currency. Politicians compete in the same market, and it appears the format is picking favorites.
Yes, so, I think the way that we encounter our politicians now is just fundamentally different from the way people did in the past. Clearly it's been a long time since people were encountering their politicians purely through, speeches when they're visiting or, the written word. But, even now seeing on social media versus, television from before, we know that social media platforms, studies show that they kind of privilege emotionally resonant, simplistic, kind of more populist messaging, and that it has led to, more populist political parties doing better, in many parts of the world. And so, I think that as we encounter our politicians much more through 5 and 10-second video bites, and they sort of have to grab our attention or else we move on, it means that we encounter them as sort of people that we might want to hang out with or that we want to entertain us, and much less so, based on the quality of their ideas, something, if they're trying to lay out a nuanced policy position, there really isn't time for that.
And so you scroll from one post to the next. That's unlike the fixed engagement you practice when reading a book. And going by what Anders Hansen says, at this rate, we're collectively on a downward spiral.
Yes, I think the ability to engage in deep thought is being challenged now in a way that hasn't been, at least not in our lifetime. The irony of this is that so much work is going to be taken over by AI in the coming years, and to be able to focus is probably going to be even more important on the job market. So,
by the way, if you're watching this so far and you are not aware of it, most modern phones have this thing called digital well-being, basically. And digital well-being is basically a sort of app that you can activate. At least my phone has it. It should have, first of all, you can set a goal basically here for days. So I see that most of the time I have actually failed to meet my goals, which is bad, of course. But you can also up timers. You can limit actually the amount of time you spend with apps, but you have to commit to it. And you can limit the time you spend on certain apps by as much amount as you want it.
So therefore, what we really need in a digital economy is exactly what's being deprived of us in a digital economy. And I think this all boils down to the fact that we need to understand that we never evolved to be focused or happy or anything like that. We evolved to survive in a world that was very dangerous. And then those functions that used to be functions evolutionarily, they have become Achilles heels in our modern environment. And we need to protect ourselves from that.
The good news is society, including the generation being raised in this system, is waking up to the issue.
And of course, this is something that so many have felt. In Sweden, there was a study that showed that almost more than 8 out of 10 young people wanted to read more, but they just can't because it's very difficult to stay off your screen. I saw a study that was mentioned in The Guardian that shows that almost half of all teenagers in the UK wish that they lived in a world where the internet did not exist.
Now that's a sizable proportion, and it says a lot. In fact, they're reaching out for the older, slower things.
Well, so I have some signs of...
Look, that's incredibly extreme. It's up to you how to use social media, up to you how to do all these things. But in terms of especially young people, I think social media has been a grand failure, because if we look at type of people that social media made popular is kind of ridiculous.
Hope, Gen Z, they seem to be more attached to print media actually than prior generations. I've seen in prior reporting that I've done, they kind of like vinyl records and they like, actually printed books. And it seems like it's some backlash against living in a kind of digital, ephemeral world, that they want something that really feels like concrete and tangible. So I definitely think that that's a sign of hope. I guess, I almost hope in a way that I'm totally wrong in 100 years and that I do look very silly, and everyone has started to read again.
Yeah, we
but
all hope
it's so
the
hard to
same.
know what will happen.
But surely paperback nostalgia won't carry this alone. There'll need to be a real reversal.
But I think for this to sort of reverse on a wholesale level, would kind of require that we make a different decision than, the people who were kind of the guardians of the Library of Alexandria did, that we decide on a societal, large scale level that this is something that's too great to give up and that we have to choose differently.
Anders Hansen also thinks we'll be able to turn things around.
Things will get better when we understand our vulnerabilities and ask for better products. And I think also that we have been rather naive when it comes to regulation about these things, because they have not been regulated. And we regulate everything in society. We regulate cars and buildings and bridges and what have you, because these things are infrastructure to society. And of course, social media is also infrastructure to society. But for some reason, we have accepted that they should not be regulated. Perhaps we have just bought into the narrative of the tech industry. And that narrative is that either you are for technology, you're for the future, or you're against it. You're a Luddite, you're a break. And I think that's a wrong metaphor. It's not about being before or against technology or before or against the future. It's should this technology, which has become so vital in everyone's life, be developed with the interests of the user or the company? That's the question.
Ultimately, reading is just too great a practice to let go of.
Like people are, thinking, oh, reading, it is kind of a frivolous activity sometimes. You don't need to do it. But I talk about in the piece how this is the way that all the world's knowledge has been passed down to us. And, if we don't choose to read that, we are sacrificing just our inheritance from human history. And so I definitely think, my reporting showed and tried to make a case that that is a huge price to pay, and that we would be giving up, something really wonderful in not reading and not taking advantage of, all the information and the history and the culture that we've been given, from the past 6,000 years.
And that takes us back to the library in Alexandria. The scrolls remained on the shelves while generation after generation looked elsewhere until the darkness had gathered. Now, Rose Horowitz says it's happening again, but there's room to turn things around. At least you made it here to the end of one long argument. The skill Anders Hansen calls reversible hasn't gone anywhere yet. And what happens to it next is decided in small moments, like after this video ends and your thumb hovers over the next thing.
Yeah, and people that made through this reaction are the real legends. Hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and let's stop scrolling.